ably assisted by Patricia Weinman, Christina English, and we also have on our seminar a captioner, Susie. So welcome and thank you, Susie. Masako is a friend. We have known each other for over 5 years, and she, as I said, was instrumental in inviting me and hosting me as a faculty host at Tokyo Institute of Technology. And it has been a wonderful relationship, both academically and also as friends. Dr. Masako Ikogami is a professor of technology and innovation at the Department of Innovation Science at Tokyo Institute of Technology, and she's also the professor of Value and Decision Science at the Graduate School of Decision Science and Technology at Tokyo Tech. Prior to coming to Tokyo Tech as a full professor, she was a professor of political science at in Sweden at Uppsala University, where she was also the director for many years of the Center for Pacific Asia Studies. That was not at Uppsala, that was at Stockholm University. I beg your pardon. Professor Ikegami holds a Doctor of Sociology from University of Tokyo and also PhD in Peace and Conflict Research from Uppsala University in Sweden. Her research interests are very broad, and but primarily focus on empirical analysis of the defense sector, the R&D, the production, defense policy, and that's where my expertise and interest intersect with Masako's, and that we jointly teach a course on defense research at Tokyo Tech to mostly grad students, but also senior undergraduates. She also works on arms control and disarmament, and of course on Asian regional security and confidence building measures. And she will be talking about that today. She lectures widely around the world. She was also the recipient of the prestigious Abe Fellowship, which is given by the Social Science Research Council and a Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership. She was also the recipient of fellowship, I think it's called POSCO, and I don't exactly know the acronym, maybe Masako can tell you, at the East-West Center in Honolulu, where she initiated the work on North Korean nuclear crisis. She's a regular member of the Pugwash conferences, and we have had several lecturers this series from the Pugwash conferences on science and international affairs, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995. And she's also on the board of the Swedish Pugwash and very active, of course, in Japanese Pugwash. And her specialties are primarily in the work that she does in defense area on decision-making analysis in the nuclear age and diplomatic and historical perspectives. And she works on nuclear deterrence, disarmament, as I said earlier, and regional security, as well as crisis management and human security. I had the pleasure, at her invitation, actually, to attend 2 meetings in South Korea in the last 3 years. She was invited as a speaker, and I went with her to attend some very important conferences in South Korea on the issues of course, peace in the Korean Peninsula. So, without further ado, Masako.
Oh, thank you very much, Subrata. Thank you very much, and good afternoon in Boston time. Thank you very much indeed. Can you hear me? Yes. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very kind introduction, and how do you do to most of you. Thank you very much for today, for this great opportunity. It is my great pleasure and great honor to get invited to give a talk for this very traditional exclusive seminar series here at the MIT. Actually, at Tokyo Tech, we have also a long tradition of this kind of seminar. It's called Tuesday seminars, seminar series. And this Tokyo Tech, this is also mostly scholars and students interested in science, technology, and society get together. And this Tuesday seminar series has something like 40 years tradition. So perhaps Radius has much longer tradition, but since MIT and Tokyo Tech, we are quite similar in a way, so as a university. So it is my great pleasure indeed to thank you very much for this great opportunity. And today I would like to talk about Asian security, insecurity, not security, insecurity. So allow me to share the screen first. Okay, here we go. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So today the topic is missile and nuclear insecurity in East Asia. And here I would like to talk that the point is whenever we talk about this kind of military or security issues, actually historical context is very important. And as a social scientist, I'm a minority here at Tokyo Tech, because just like MIT, Tokyo Tech is in engineering, natural science oriented university. So basically social scientists are minority, and among them, I take my methodology is qualitative analysis, qualitative case analysis, which makes me even a minority, because most of my colleagues here at my department still employ quantitative analysis. So in my case, I take more. I belong to a minority here at Tokyo Tech. However, today I would like to re-emphasize the importance of qualitative analysis, and also to understand security issues. Actually, historical context is very important. So that's what I would like to talk today. So first, in Asia, if you look back the Asian history after the end of the World War II, we can see that both nuclear and missile proliferation in Asia actually started from China. Chronologically, you can see that. If you look back all the historical events, that's clear. And what is noteworthy is that when it comes to the nuclear armament, it started, of course, in Asia. China was the first Asian country to go nuclear. And and that was October 1964. And when I compared the Beijing's statement of its first successful nuclear test and North Korean statement on its first nuclear test in 2006, I noticed these statements are basically identical. If you make a kind of text analysis, you can see here there are two texts. So you can read basically all the expressions, more or less. North Korean Pyongyang's statement is basically almost a copy of Beijing's statement. They just rephrase it a little bit. Otherwise, basically it is identical. And the logic is that both China and North Korea claim that they were compelled to go nuclear because of the American nuclear blackmail. So that is their logic. So therefore, they emphasize. So Beijing says oppose the US imperialist policy of nuclear blackmail and nuclear threat. And then Pyongyang also says it was the US extreme threat of nuclear war and sanctions, which compelled Pyongyang to conduct a nuclear test, etc. So you can see the logic is the same. And this is not coincidence. The reason is that later I will come back to this point. The reason is that both China and North Korea share the same experience, and that was the Korean War. At the time of the Korean War, indeed, China, North Korea, and China both were faced to nuclear blackmail from the United States. And you can see, obviously, that motivated both Beijing and Pyongyang to go nuclear. So you can see that. So, and then, so China made all efforts to go nuclear. So in spite of its very hard economic situation, economic social situation, and still Mao Zedong at the time managed to successfully develop nuclear weapons. And the problem is that after China's nuclear debut, China continuously provided, in a way, China acted more like a proliferator of nuclear and also eventually missile technology. And that is very, nowadays recently there are many studies showing that. So for instance, China's nuclear armament triggered other Asian states' pursuit of nuclear weapons. Typically, for instance, in case of China, after the Korean War, of course, China started its nuclear weapons program in the early 1950s. And then, because of China, then India, who also suffered from a border conflict with China. And then India was also motivated to go nuclear. And on the other hand, because of this Sino-India border conflict, then China was motivated to provide nuclear weapons to Pakistan. I mean, enemy's friend logic. So China provided very substantial assistance to Pakistan to go nuclear. And on the other hand, North Korea, who also suffered from the so-called the US nuclear blackmail during the Korean War, North Korea also maintained long-term ambition to go nuclear. So eventually, North Korea established this nuclear facility as early as 1964. And then even North Korea requested China's assistance to develop nuclear weapons in 1975, and they received some assistance as well. And because of this, North Korea going nuclear, even South Korea, of course, was motivated to go nuclear. So South Korea did have some, quite robust efforts to go nuclear. However, in the 1970s, but those efforts were thwarted by the American pressure. And also Taiwan as well. Since China went nuclear, Taiwan was also, of course, naturally motivated to go nuclear. So even Taiwan had quite a sophisticated nuclear weapons program, but in the 1970s and also 80s. But then again, it was thwarted by the US pressure. And even more shocking was relatively new information, no more than 10 years old. This Nuclear Express was published by Thomas Reed and Danny Stillman, those who published lots of sensitive, declassified information. And that was very shocking in a way, that their findings was that China actually helped countries like Pakistan, North Korea to build nuclear bombs. And this book even tells that in 1982, China's president, the Deng Xiaoping, in the early 1980s began the transfer of nuclear weapons technology to Pakistan. and even the Pakistan nuclear derivative was tested in China in Xinjiang in 1990. So they lots of this kind of sensitive information, declassified information, is recorded in this book. And China also conducted underground hydronuclear experiments for France, even for France at Lope Nord in the 1990s. So the overall, according to those nuclear experts, China is nowadays in the first rank of nuclear powers. China has long decades of efforts and very strong research and development of nuclear weapons. So that is that is the story of nuclear proliferation in Asia. And then when it comes to missile, we have also a very gloomy picture of missile proliferation in East Asia. And of course, perhaps maybe I don't have to tell this. Again, China has extremely strong, large scale and missile forces, rocket forces. So here, these are all citations from the CSIS, but then you can see that China has lots of various missiles, which covers the entire Asia, and North Korea also has very various ballistic missiles, and not only ballistic missiles, but also other kinds of missiles, but lots of various kinds of missiles as well. And because of North Korean nuclear and missile threat, of course, South Korea has also very powerful missile forces, actually. Here you can see South Korea's missiles. They have also lots of, even some of them have very long ranges. So these are the situation. And what is interesting is that what Japan is quite behind all this when it comes to missile forces compared to other Northeast Asian countries. Japan is much less. Japan has much lower profile, and that is because of its pacifist constitutional constraints. So Japan basically, by its pacifist constitution, Japan is not supposed to obtain any offensive capability, and so therefore, like ballistic missiles are supposed to be that kind of offensive capability. So by constitution, Japan has not acquired any ballistic missiles, for instance. So therefore, because of these political constraints, Japan's efforts to counter all these missile threats has been mostly focusing on missile defense, and that was missile defense deployment and development in cooperation with the United States. The United States has been the only, used to be, actually the United States was the first and the only, the first development partner, of course, that back to the 1990s, and that was the first time when Japan started co-development of any military systems, and that was with the United States, and that was for missile defense system, as well as to some extent another type of fighter aircraft as well. But that was the case. So therefore, in case of Japan, basically Japan's efforts for missile to counter missile threats has been focused on missile defense systems. And nowadays, ground-based PAC-3, as well as Japan is co-developing together with the United States Aegis deployed standard missile as well. So this is what's going on. And what is interesting is that just recently, this summer, the Japanese then Defense Minister Kono suddenly, abruptly announced that Japan would suspend its planned procurement of ground-based Aegis Ashore. And which shocked, I can imagine, which shocked the American defense industry as well as the American government. However, that was the kind of first cutback for the United States in a way, because the US used to sell lots of expensive missile defense systems, as well as conducting lots of very robust co-development project together with Japan. So that was a kind of surprise. And otherwise, Japan's efforts for missile capability used to be quite modest. And for instance, hypersonic missiles. Nowadays, many Russia, the United States, China, they are developing and they are already deploying. And compared to that, in case of Japan, efforts for developing hypersonic missiles is compared to like South Korea, it's much far modest efforts. So you can see. On the other hand, however, given that North Korea last year conducted several ballistic missile tests, which shocked Japan, because these were new type of missiles which were more maneuverable. So this means that missile system doesn't work too well. So that was a kind of shock. So following a series of last year's North Korean new missile tests, then finally the Japanese Defense Ministry has started to reconsider basically the policy of missile development. So now, just recently, Tokyo has announced to decide its decision to acquire the longer range missiles, and some of them are supposed to be, if they are completed, they are supposed to be the world's longest range cruise missiles, air to land or air to ship missiles. So this is a status right now. So having said that, so this means that in East Asia, there is a new, quite intensive missile race going on. And even Japan belatedly is joining this missile race in East Asia. So that's the situation. And having said that, again, back to China, because China has the Chinese rocket force is so outstandingly large scale and very, in terms of quality and quantity, the Chinese rocket force is incomparable, is outstanding compared to its counterpart in South Korea or Japan. And North Korea, of course, quite substantial. But and what is noteworthy is that why China has got such strong, extraordinarily powerful rocket forces. How come? What made China possible to have developed and deployed such powerful missile forces? And the reason is that, and I think we can see here a kind of historical context here. In my view, after the end of the Second World War, China has been overall, in retrospect, and even throughout the Cold War era, China eventually used to be the most beneficiary of the post-World War II Cold War regime. The reason is that first, after its first successful nuclear debut in 1964, before the United States was basically because of China's communist regime, the United States was never was basically of course treated China as such. However, after the nuclear debut and because of China's friction with the Soviet Union over the border conflict, so then the United States changed its attitude, and that was during the Nixon's administration. So after the Chinese nuclear debut in 1964, the United States changed its approach to China, and then there was the rapprochement, diplomatic normalization with the United States following China's nuclear debut. So, China, so after that, after the normalization, diplomatic normalization with the United States, even China could enjoy the exclusive status, and that was Taiwan was kicked out from the United Nations, and instead China took over the Taiwan's position, or Republic of China's position in the United States. So, and then even to become a Security Council, the United Nations Security Council permanent member with all this veto and all these privileges. So eventually China gained enormously following its first nuclear test, successful nuclear test. So of course, from North Korea having seen this success story of China following its first nuclear debut, of course, Pyongyang, North Korea thinks that, oh, why not? So once you become a nuclear weapon state, you enjoy so much privileges and so favorable. So that turns my view is that probably that this China's success story after the post-World War II and Cold War era, following its first nuclear debut, gave a kind of negative lesson to North Korea. That's my interpretation. And also throughout the Cold War, China could disguise its secretive operations and all these back channel deals to its advantage in the shadow of the US-Soviet bilateral confrontation throughout the Cold War. So basically China could enjoy free space as so-called non-alignment, the leader of the non-alignment group of countries, and during the Cold War. And then on the other hand, China could easily enjoy a kind of double dealing, both with the Soviet Union and the United States. So that was the kind of favorable condition for China. And also, so China utilized the third party's benefit to massively expand its missile arsenal, particularly after the United States and the Soviet Union mutually banned their intermediate nuclear forces, Inf Treaty, 1987. This is very important. This was actually this Inf Treaty, which constrained both the US and the Soviet Russian intermediate nuclear forces, prompted China to expand its own INF in a way, ironically. So that was the case. So China's massive short and intermediate range missile for offensive war fighting strategy. And that, according to the latest U.S. The Pentagon report to Congress about China's military forces. According to that, actually, 95% of China's nuclear-capable intermediate-range missiles fall into the INF category. And the intention is basically offensive to change the status quo, to challenge the US dominance in the Asia Pacific. So that is, so the reason is, the point is that from Beijing's point of view, only if China can prevent any American military intervention in the Asia Pacific, basically China can achieve any agenda, and the most importantly, to conquer Taiwan, unify Taiwan, and then to secure the entire control along its so-called the first island chain and even second island chain over across the South and East China Sea. So that is China's strategic goal. So the only obstacle is the American presence and the American military intervention. So therefore, China's efforts concentrate on how to prevent the US military intervention in the region. So eventually that was, so therefore, with this regard, we can say that China's military deployment in the region is basically for offensive war fighting strategy, because China wants to change the status quo by preventing the US military intervention. So China takes offensive war fighting posture, focusing to prevent the US military intervention. And this August, even China test fired for carrier killer missiles, DF-21 to 26, into the South China Sea. And that shocked, of course, the US and its allies. That was quite shocking. So, and another point is actually that traditionally the United States maintained a kind of ambiguity when it comes to theater level nuclear deterrence. And this ambiguity actually, ironically, turned to be favorable for China, because China thinks that, oh, okay, there is no guarantee that the America will provide extended nuclear deterrence when it comes to the theater level. So as long as we keep our battles in the theater, we don't have to worry about nuclear war. So in a way, so this is my interpretation, but in my understanding, the American traditional ambiguity of theater level nuclear deterrence actually worked favorably for China, and in a way emboldened China's offensive posture. So this is so here nowadays the US military is so much annoyed by all this China's expanding, rapidly expanding nuclear forces. For instance, here you can see after the unilateral, well, the United States, of course, because of this through the Soviet US or Russia-US bilateral arms control and arms reduction talks. So in 1991, the US unilaterally withdrew its tactical nuclear weapons as well. And then once it happened, you can see here, you can see, this is from Rand Corporation. You can see after the US withdrew its tactical nuclear weapons, then China quickly started to expand its intermediate forces. So here you can see 1996, and then 2003, and then 2010, and 2017. So you can see rapid expansion of intermediate missile forces, so evolving, so that you can see. And even you can, if you look at all the frequency of missile testing, you can see this is from CSIS. Even North Korea, you can see, has been emboldened to test fire missiles after the US withdrew tactical nuclear weapons from the region. So you can see, in case of North Korea, here you can see before, very rarely they tested, but then after the US tactical nuclear forces withdrawal, North Korea rapidly increased the frequency of its nuclear testing. So recent US-China tension has triggered China's brinkmanship strategy. Well, what's going on now is that the China's expansion is so much that in the end, the US military has to also take counter action. And this may trigger China's brinkmanship strategy. So nowadays, typically like this August, China test-fired DF-21, 26 missiles in the South China Sea, which was extremely provocative. And in a way, China, it seems like Xi Jinping, it seems like China is, by creating a missile crisis, China is in a way experimenting on his strategy of brinkmanship to coerce the US into backing down militarily in the Pacific. So in a way, it is very interesting that nowadays, before, it was North Korea who used to take this kind of brinkmanship. But nowadays, overall, North Korea is suffering from lots of economic hardship and things like that. So instead of North Korea now, it seems like China is taking more a kind of North Korea type of brinkmanship nowadays. So having seen this, this recent US-China tension make us wonder if there is any East Asia might have a new missile crisis, such as a kind of Cuban Missile Crisis type of crisis, or Able Archer 1983. This is a crisis. This is a kind of new crisis during the Cold War, which was known to public quite recently. I think no more than a couple of years ago, that because of declassified information during the Cold War. And what happened was that during the Cold War, the Able Archer war scare crisis, that happened during the Cold War, when the Soviet was deploying intermediate, well, SS-20 intermediate forces, and then the NATO asked the Britain, Germany, they asked the US to deploy missiles to counter the Soviets' intermediate missiles, and that was Pershing missiles. So the US also deployed Pershing missiles. And then when they deployed the new missiles, of course, the NATO had to conduct new exercise, drills, of course, they need. And that had caused, it seems like, now we know, lots of scare on the side of the Warsaw Pact. So they thought, when they saw the NATO military practice with newly deployed Pershing, they thought that was real. So then they thought they were almost about to make a preemptive attack. instead of being attacked by the NATO. So that was, it seems like the situation was extremely dangerous. Some people say it was in a way more dangerous than the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, because at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was the crisis, the sense of crisis was shared by Khrushchev and JF Kennedy. But in case of this able Archer, the NATO was not aware that the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact was in panic. So that was in a way more dangerous. So therefore, I used to think that, and after this crisis, then INF Treaty was concluded in 1987. So as a peace researcher, I used to think in the old days, I used to think conservatives used to say that during the Cold War, the NATO, the West won against the Soviet Union economically, because the Soviet Union was economically very bad situation. So economically, the West won, and also the Reagan administration was conducting SDI project by mobilizing its Western allies. So the conservatives used to say that the economically, and also this SDI project defeated the Soviet Union. That was a kind of conservative interpretation. And on the other hand, I myself, as a peace researcher, used to think that it is not only that, but also at that time there was very strong anti-nuclear peace movement in Europe. And that also motivated both of the leaders to go to this INF Treaty. So that was my interpretation. But recently, when I have learned about this able Archer crisis, I started to wonder, perhaps that could have been the biggest motivation for the top leaders of the Soviet Union and the United States to sign this INF Treaty. I don't know. I think these are something maybe peace researchers should go into this issue. It seems like that probably was the case. So anyway, INF Treaty, very important, and it was signed. And historically, the INF Treaty is so important because this was the watershed to end the confrontational posture between the United States and the Soviet Union. And after the INF Treaty in 1987, then the wall of Berlin collapsed in 1989. And then the next year, the Soviet Union, the regime demised. So therefore, it was the INF Treaty which triggered the ending of the Cold War. It was so important. So therefore, it is indeed it's a pity that the INF Treaty is now, expired after the US first withdrew, and then the Soviet Union also withdrew. So it is too bad. So missile deployments eliminated by the INF Treaty. So many missiles were eliminated because thanks to the INF Treaty. And now when the INF Treaty is expired, so it's a nightmare, not only in Europe, but also like in Asia. We might see a renewed nightmare of massive missiles deployed. So we are at the watershed. So therefore, many peace-loving people are hoping to see a new multilateral INF Treaty. So this means that, particularly the reason that the United States withdrew from the INF Treaty was that, of course, the US, who is suffering from rapidly expanding Chinese INF intermediate forces, of course, then the US thinks that it's ridiculous to bind with each other, with Russia, when China is expanding so much. So therefore, if we ever see another new INF Treaty, it must be, China must be included. And this point is shared by the United States and the Soviet Union both. So a new multilateral INF treaty is needed, badly in need. However, there are serious risks and grave dangers when we are contemplating a new multilateral INF treaty. And that is that the INF treaty during the Cold War was in a way very simple, because during the Cold War, it was a very clear-cut confrontation between the East and West blocs, with the US and the Soviet Union both shared understanding of the MAD doctrine, mutually assured destruction doctrine. So it was, in a way, during the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union did share the language. So, and the whole confrontation was very clear-cut. So therefore, the INF treaty was possible. However, now, compared to that, the situation is asymmetric. Well, missile forces, I mean, there is no symmetry at all. China is expanding while the US doesn't have, well, things like that. So this kind of, and even North Korea, to include North Korea, asymmetric. So asymmetric confrontation tend to cause a higher risk of misperception, misjudgment because of the fear, for instance. And also nowadays we see new technologies like hypersonic missiles and artificial intelligence, and all these kind of new technologies could cause unexpected or unintended missile operation, and that is very dangerous. So what shall we do? And another point which I would like to point out is nowadays, particularly in case of the United States, this new nuclear posture review emphasize the kind of nuclear weapons to be used with low-yield nuclear warheads. So this is very dangerous, and it is not only the United States, but also Russia, and also China as well, and some other countries as well. So this is another very dangerous situation, is that during the Cold War, until the end of the Cold War, nuclear weapons were supposed to be only for deterrence. Nuclear weapons were basically not supposed to be used in real. It was basically for deterrence. But nowadays, after long decades after the end of the Cold War, nowadays many nuclear weapon states started to consider nuclear weapons to be used in real. And this is I would say the most dangerous change of the course. So combined with all these missiles, high technology like hypersonic missiles with command and control system with artificial intelligence, and then all these low-yield nuclear warheads. So you can imagine the situation is completely different from the time of the Cold War. We have to deal with so many new and potentially extremely dangerous weapon systems all at once. And with all this nuclear, new technologies and new low-yield nuclear warheads, then the problem is that those nuclear weapon states talk about ambiguity of nuclear-capable dual use. For instance, in case of China, China deploys massive thousands of missiles. They say they are conventional, but they are technically they are nuclear capable, dual use. So this means that nuclear warheads, it can be conventional, it can be nuclear warheads. We never know. And nowadays, the United States, to counter all this China's massive missile deployment, the United States, the US military is now sounding its allies in the Asia Pacific if they redeploy missiles against to counter China's missile threat. And in that case, they say it's conventional, but technically they are dual use, nuclear capable. So we never know. And this ambiguity is another uncertainty, extremely dangerous. So that's and then hypersonic missile arms race. So this is Carnegie, James Acton's and other experts repeatedly point out the danger of new type of hypersonic missile arms race. There is also new arms race going on. Of course, China is heading, and Russia is heading, and China as well, and the US as well. And then even South Korea had started to make efforts for developing. And in case of Japan, hypersonic missile development still remain very modest. On the other hand, for Japan, Japan's concerns is this North Korea's last year short-range ballistic missile, which is maneuverable. So this means that this kind of missiles make all these Japanese efforts of missile defense systems completely, basically useless. So therefore, from the Japanese point of view, this North Korea last year's short-range maneuverable ballistic missiles was a kind of game-changing technology. So nowadays, the Japanese self-defense forces have a headache how to deal with this. So that's the situation. So, and having said that, I should hurry. The genesis of the code, here now I come back to the historical context of all this strategic confrontation, because in my view, and this is quite, I would say, some people might say this is it's revisionistic view, but in my view, the very genesis of the US-China strategic confrontation can be traced back to the Korean War, and based on a very still unknown latest research on the Korean War. And traditionally, there used to be the traditional view is that the China willy-nilly came to help North Korea. First, North Korea invaded the South, and then China willy-nilly went to support North Korea. So that was a kind of traditional view. However, the latest research on millions of pages of North Korean declassified documents, which were all confiscated by the United States, by the UN forces during the Korean War. And so therefore, those millions of North Korean top secret military documents are all in the American National Archive, which were declassified about in the end of the 1980s. And it was the Japanese journalist Hagiwara Ryo, who passed away 2 years ago, unfortunately. He was the first, he was a Korean expert, and he was the first who went to the Washington, D.C. to study all these massive North Korean military documents, all in Korean, of course, and some of them military coded documents, and he decoded all these North Korean military documents. And then his findings was that actually the latest, according to Hagiwara Ryo's study, Mao Zedong played a much more active role in initiating the war than previously understood. And Mao Zedong had decided to support North Korea long before the outbreak of the war, Korean War in June 1950. And Mao Zedong had made a strategic decision to support Kim Il-sung's invasion of the South. And what Mao Zedong did in concrete was that Mao Zedong granted 30,000 ethnic Korean troops elite forces from the PLA. There was a Korean elite forces of PLA, Korean forces. And this, Mao Zedong granted this 30,000 elite Korean PLA elite forces to Kim Il-sung. And these forces was extremely strong during the Civil War. They defeated the Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang forces in Manchuria. So the 166th Division, which was the Korean Special Forces, PLA elite forces, was granted to Kim Il-sung, then turned to become the 6th Division of the Korean People's Army. And it was this 6th Division which made the first initial attack against the South during the Korean War. So that was quite shocking. So what this newly discovered events show is that for China, the Korean War was strategically extremely important, critical, vitally important for China to secure its strategic posture, strategic dominance or strategic strength against the US in Asia. And so therefore, China and North Korea are inseparable allies, even today. Even though they may dislike with each other, but strategically they share too much agenda against their common adversary, and that is the United States. So therefore, the Korean War is I would say the genesis of the strategic confrontation between the United States and China. People tend to say the US versus North Korea, but in my view, having seen all this, newly discovered historical facts, I would say the Korean War is the genesis of the strategic confrontation between the United States and China. So therefore, so this means that, and the Korean War has not ended yet, and that's another issue. So this means that to seek any peace or tension reduction, in my view, the most important precondition of peace or missile disarmament, or including nuclear disarmament of North Korea, in my view, the precondition is to end the Korean War. So 3 years ago, I wrote a short article for Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and the title, Prevent Nuclear Catastrophe, Finally End the Korean War. And actually that year, in October, the US and Trump and Kim Jong-un met in Singapore. That was in October, incidentally. So, and this is my last slide. So toward a multilateral INF treaty, and also for over a decade, I have been arguing that Asia does need a nation version of the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. OSCE played a very important role during the Cold War to prevent any unexpected, unintended breakout of conflicts. So therefore, Asia does need this kind of confidence building measures. So first, to finally end the Korean Cold War, we do need, because this is the genesis of the strategic confrontation. And also, on the other hand, we do need international consensus to be established to keep the East and South China seas open. Right now, China is trying to encircle all these seas, but that's not, that shouldn't be allowed. It should be kept free and open. And we need lots of efforts for making confidence building measures, CBM in Asia. And then eventually, after all, hopefully we'll be able to have a new renewed trilateral, first of all, INF among between the US, Russia, and China. And then eventually this trilateral INF treaty may well be expanded to multilateral INF, which is to also even somehow include hypersonic missiles as well. So then lastly, we do need a universal norm to prohibit a preemptive missile attack, because it's so dangerous. Having seen all these new technologies, it's so dangerous to think, to contemplate any kind of preemptive, and then you might trigger your adversary to attack first. So just like Able Archer 1983 type of crisis might come back again. So therefore, we do need to establish a new universal norm to prohibit any kind of preemptive missile strike. So I should stop now. Sorry, I have talked too much. That's all. I should stop now.
Thank you, Masako.
Sorry.
There is a lot to digest. We have about 20 plus minutes for discussion. And normally we have people asking questions, submitting their questions in the Q&A box. And then Trish Weinman or Christina will read them out. And then you can answer. But I haven't seen any questions. So I will make a couple of points, and then you can respond, and we can, by that time, probably there will be some questions. First, I want to just establish two things. One is that there is no indication that China is putting tactical nuclear weapons in place. There's no indication whatsoever of that. I mean, they have a large missile force. Yes, true. There's a large missile force in many countries have these intermediate range missiles, but there is no indication that China is nuclearizing those things. And the second point, that your basic thesis of China being the proliferator in Asia, just one, it's not a counterfactual, but I basically want to observe that the Chinese missile program is a mostly indigenous program. That means they developed it themselves, and given their rivalry with the Soviet Union at the time, they didn't get a lot of help from the Russians, except probably from just the old-fashioned Russian missiles that Russia gave to a lot of its countries in its orbit. So it's a purely indigenous program. And yes, on the proliferation stuff, I'm sure what you were saying, there's a lot of truth to that. And those are two just my observations. The other observation is that, as correctly pointed out, that any kind of analysis like that, we have to take into consideration the historical context. And I think that to make the historical context a little more comprehensive, one cannot ignore the Pacific War, the Japanese occupation of China, the Japanese occupation of Korea, the Japanese atrocities in China, in the Philippines, and so forth, and what gave rise to a lot of these tensions and after the Second World War. And that the fact is, the United States has 80 bases in Japan today. The Tokyo airspace is controlled by the United States. And in Okinawa, and I mean, I'm not lecturing you, of course. You are expert in this thing. So, and U.S. is forward deployed almost 40,000 troops in South Korea. Now, China is not doing that in Cuba or in the borders of the United States, just like they're doing in the Baltics. So I think there are this business of being offensive, defensive. I mean, you say that China is offensively deploying things, but at the same time to deter an US. I mean, I agree with your conclusion wholeheartedly that peace in Northeast Asia will come only when we end the Korean War once and for all, withdraw the US bases from Japan and US troops from South Korea. Then I think we can really talk peace in Asia. Otherwise, I think this is just has gone on for 70 years and will go on. So anyway, that's my spiel. Thank you,
Okay.
Masako. Please, your comments, and then hopefully we'll
Okay.
have some questions.
Well, of course, China has no. Well, I'm not the right person to talk about this. All this, whether Chinese nuclear warheads, conventional nuclear, we don't know. But the point is that there is no indication. But on the other hand, there is no indication to deny possibility of China to use nuclear warheads neither. So I mean, this is a point of ambiguity, and they say it's conventional, but on the other hand, technically, they are dual use. So then we have to think about, of course, always the worst case scenario. So we can't neglect the worst case scenario, and that is that the nuclear, it can be nuclear warheads instead of conventional warheads. So there is a technical there is possibility. So this is the risk that we can't neglect. This is the first point. And China indigenous, no, not at all. If you read this Thomas Reed book or many other accounts, even including Chinese accounts, both the father of Chinese nuclear weapons and also the father of Chinese missiles were both originally American-based Chinese who were invited back to China. Actually, those days, Mao Zedong invited back lots of Chinese scientists, overseas Chinese from the US and from Europe. So when it comes to nuclear weapons know-how and also missiles know-how, lots of know-hows, critical technology and know-hows were actually brought back by overseas Chinese scientists. And these are all very well recorded. And even when you talk with Chinese scholars, they don't deny. I mean, so it's not at all indigenous. That was like China got lots of know-how and knowledge from all over the world, so from Europe and the US. So that's the thing. And the third point, actually, yes, the US, that's why I started with my talk by showing this Beijing and Pyongyang's declaration of their nuclear debut. Both of them blame the US nuclear blackmail as the cause of their nuclear efforts. They say that the US nuclear, and it is true, it is true. That's true. I think that they have the point. However, about 10 years ago, when I was doing research at the East-West Center as an Abe Fellow, what I wrote two short articles at the East-West Center in Washington, D.C. And that was, my findings at the time was that the current China's approach, geopolitical approach, is very similar to Imperial Japan before the wartime. And for instance, China's one road, one belt, it is a kind of expanded variation of Imperial Japan's Manchukuo policy. When Japan invaded Manchukuo, then what Japan did was that massive investment for infrastructure making. Maybe I should send you a link later, the East-West Center. If you search East-West, I wrote some short articles. So what China is doing as a latecomer, of course, China is a latecomer. And now China is challenging the United States as the hegemonic power. And this situation is very similar to the pre-war time. I mean, Japan was, at the time, Imperial Japan was a latecomer, and then challenging all the Western imperial powers in Asia. And that caused the war, right? In Southeast Asia or in China. So that's the very similar this confrontation, I mean, between the existing power versus challenging latecomers, challenging the hegemony. This confrontation, very similar confrontation, what we can see now. And that is that China is now challenging the US as the existing hegemon. And then China wants to challenge the American hegemonic power. And then to change the regional and world order in its on its terms. So therefore, and this is what Imperial Japan did. I mean, Imperial Japan as a latecomer wanted to challenge the Western imperial powers in Asia, and that caused the war. So therefore, it's very dangerous. And so therefore, China's approach to Africa or to North Korea or to other Southeast Asia, very similar to what Imperial Japan did in Manchuria, very similar, or even Korea at the time, very similar.
Yeah,
Very,
thank you for that.
my argument is very peculiar.
No, I said thank you for that. But on the source of the missile technology, okay, yes, I mean there was this Chinese professors who went back to China after he couldn't stay in the United States
And
with the
even
Chinese Exclusion Act. But we had our Nazi collaborators for our missile program here.
Yeah, of course.
Werner von Braun. Yes.
This is the point. This is the point, and this is the point. So therefore, I always tell my students that it's very wrong to talk about national to talk about technology is basically borderless. It's nonsense to talk about national, technology, because if you look at all this, technology research and development efforts, like scientists' activities, also basically borderless, and so is the case with the technology. I mean, so if you look details of how technology, scientific activities or technological development is taking place, basically it's borderless. I mean,
It's
people
very
are
interesting. Like we're talking about that now, and a few days ago, the Iranian nuclear scientist Fakhrizadeh was assassinated in front of his wife in Tehran, and so there was this discussion with the Bulletin. Atomic Sciences reprinted an article from 2012 about this so-called Heisenberg principle. Werner Heisenberg, who is famous for his theory of principle of uncertainty in quantum mechanics, was also targeted for kidnapping and assassination in Switzerland in 1944. So whereas Manhattan Project is a history of scientists coming from many of the European countries, and Victor Weisskopf apparently recommended Victor Weisskopf, famous former MIT professor from Manhattan Project, and I remember him very fondly. But he recommended to the president that they should kidnap Heisenberg in Switzerland when he was going to give the talk. Anyway, that was called off. So this is a long history of the scientists crossing borders and stuff.
So that's the kind of irony. I mean, even the Manhattan Project itself was also basically, in a way, multinational. I mean, from Britain, from Canada, the scientists also joined. Many European scientists escaped from Europe also joined. So it's basically, when it comes to scientists' nationalities, it was very multinational, even the Manhattan Project, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And we talk about it in our class in Tokyo all the time about Manhattan Project. Masako, we have about 10 minutes left. I want to just go back to two of your things, and one is the ending of the Korean War, and one thing, and your recommendation also for banning preemptive missile strikes. And I mean that's the missiles are being used primarily at this stage by the United States all over the Middle East, from bombing Syria to Iraq and Kosovo in Europe, etc. So I don't know whether there's going to be any possibility of doing something like that with U.S. relying so much for its offensive work, and other countries like China or India. I don't know, but it is, I think, that missile proliferation and something about the missiles is so important. And the second is, how do we go about in the new administration of Biden? Any thoughts about on going forward with the Korean crisis?
American new president about the Korean crisis, you mean? But I'm not the right person to discuss that. I, I don't know. I have no idea. But I think Trump was right to meet Kim Jong Un. I think it was very important to have a direct communication with North Korea, because what I had hoped was eventually to end the Korean War. However, I don't know what happened, but maybe economic sanctions or something like that, something was involved, so it didn't. But basically, it's very important to. From the North Korean point of view, if the Korean War ends, then there is no point for North Korea to be so heavily armed. I mean, if the war ends, why does North Korea have to pay so much money for out of limited resources for nuclear weapons or missiles? I mean, if the war ends, so I think the war, the first to come is to end the war. Otherwise, I mean, to expect North Korea to dismantle its nuclear weapons, almost is identical to claim disarming North Korea, because the war status is still going on, and who can expect North Korea to disarm when the war status is still continuing? No, it's logically it doesn't work. So therefore, if we sincerely expect North Korea to dismantle its nuclear programs, then we have to end the Korean War first.
You think there is support for some version, some approach, a step-by-step approach that North Korea has proposed, that the U.S. has generally opposed? The U.S. wants North Korea to disarm first, and as you correctly point out, that is a non-starter, as it has proven. But what I was asking, a country like Japan, or with of course Moon Jae-in's South Korea and other countries in Asia, are they in strong favor of getting to an agreement to end the Korean War?
Well, actually, this is interesting. When I wrote this article 3 years ago, and I even wrote a similar article in Japanese for Japanese media. And 3 years ago, it was like outright denial. What? Are you crazy? Are you pro North Korea? People just, I was completely, it was an outright denial of rejection of this kind of idea. However, it's interesting, and even South Korea's reaction, perhaps at that time, are you pro North Korea? No, not at all. But during the course of in the past 3 years, now, even in Japan, there are lots of NGOs, like Peace Board and those people who agree with agree with the idea. So nowadays you can see more and more civilian groups chanting that to end the Korean War first, because that's logical. I mean, if we want to see non-nuclear North Korea, then we have to end the war first. So, I mean, why should we continue the war status?
Well, with
I mean,
that
we
positive
can't
note,
expect North Korea to disarm, as long as the war
absolutely,
continue.
absolutely.
The
Oh,
logic, the logic. I'm not particularly pro North Korea, but that's the logic.
well, thank
Mm,
you. I
mm.
think with that note, we come to the conclusion of our 10th and final seminar, and we thank Masako Ikegami for staying up so late. It's
Yes.
actually quite late,
Ah,
3
thank you.
o'clock in
Thank
the
you very
morning
much.
Thank you so
in
much.
Tokyo. So
Thank
thank you
you.
again, and I'll let Trish give the final word. Thank you so much,
Yes.
everybody.
Thank you very
for
much.
joining.
Thank you very much for a very exclusive opportunity. Thank you very much. It was my honor. Thank you very much indeed.
Our
Thank you.
pleasure.
It was our honor to host you. We're so very grateful. We hope you get a good night's sleep now.
And I hope this is the beginning of our collaboration.
That would be
Absolutely.
wonderful.
Subrata, I
Yes.
hope you will come back to Tokyo Tech next year. Hopefully.
Subrata, thank
Let's get
you.
to the pandemic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Subrata,
Okay.
thank you for this amazing
You're welcome. Thank you,
semester-long
everybody.
series.
Thank you very much indeed. It was wonderful. And I very much enjoyed this wonderful seminar series. It was very, very
Yeah, I know
fantastic.
you attended several. So thank you, Masako, for that as well.
Almost all, basically.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Arigatou gozaimashita.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.